Welcome to Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. We're in the series on critical thinking skills in science. This is Chapter 11, Non-Western Critical Thinking, Session number 7. In this session, what we're going to do is continue building the house, but in a way that addresses the epistemological beliefs, which one of them was the source and the other was the methods, and how those will affect how one approaches the critical thinking topic or applying critical thinking as the Socratic method of engaging or the non-Socratic method of seeking. But the methods are very important. Here we have the house, and we've gone from the foundation, number one, which was the choosing of our source, of reliable knowledge. And the source that the Hebrews chose was external authority, which was God, as revealed through special and general revelation. So it's what we have today written as Scripture and creation, which is outside. On that foundation, we have 4 pillars of faith that they have embraced and believe on, which are affirmations that contrast to the affirmations of the Western house of basic beliefs. And then the floor represents a system of practice, not a system of thought, not a theoretical system of thought, but a system of practice as in relation to God and to their covenants. Based on their covenants, we look at what about the 3 pillars or methods of getting to reliable knowledge? Do they fit into the Hebrew culture mindset? So that's what we're going to look at, is that in the Western house, the methods of gaining reliable knowledge was rationalism, empiricism, and skepticism. Are those 3 methods still applicable for this house that we're erecting on based on the Hebrew culture? It says, for the Hebrew culture, reliable knowledge was not constructed individually. That would be based on rationalism, nor arrived at by group consensus. That would also be rationalism, but it would be by kind of how science operates today on group consensus. It was revealed. So knowledge was revealed through the covenant relationship from God to man. So the method of getting to reliable knowledge for the Hebrew nation was by relationship to their God. And so their God is the one that led them, that gave them wisdom and knowledge. One of the Hebrew methods of attaining knowledge was based on empiricism, experience, which would be empiricism. Their experience of being delivered from slavery in Egypt by God. Okay, so what we're saying here is that yes, they did have a method of gaining reliable knowledge, and part of that method was based on empiricism. But empiricism was not a method that generated reliable knowledge. For them, empiricism and experience were the attributes that affirmed the faithfulness of their source of reliable knowledge, which was God. So in other words, God was the source, and empiricism or experience is what ratified or confirmed that God is faithful. God is trustworthy. This is what we find in Hebrews chapter 19, verses 3 and 4. Moses went up to God, and Yahweh called to him out of the mountain, saying, "This is what you shall tell the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. What this context is saying is that God is saying, look what I've done. This is what you shall tell the house of Jacob. Just tell them to believe in me. Have faith. Jump. No, he says, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. God was present. The nation of Israel was delivered by God's power from slavery in Egypt. And by miracles, they were delivered. Then they come to the Red Sea, and then the Egyptian army is coming down, and there's no escape. So they only have one option: to trust in the God that delivered them the first time. He will deliver them a second time. So God tells Moses, put your staff into the waters, and I will part the waters before you. So Moses does what God tells him to do. Moses is faithful. Moses complies. Moses does it. But it's not by the power of Moses. Moses is doing it as a figurehead that trusts in the faithfulness of God, that God is going to do something. Otherwise, Moses is going to look like a fool, taking this thing and trying to jam it into the ground, and nothing happens. And then he's got a whole raft of people behind him saying, hey, what's going on? But no, Moses went out there and did it as an act of faith. And he planted that into the waters, and the waters separated. Now, I do believe it was the Red Sea and not the Reed Sea, meaning that it was reeds and it was just a swamp. Because for the Hebrew people to pass through, and yet the Egyptian army drowned, there had to be something else to it. There had to have been water. There had to have been enough water to have drowned the Hebrews as well as the Egyptians, but God delivered the Egyptians, or the Hebrews, and he delivered the Egyptians to death. So this is what he's saying, is that you have seen what I did to the Egyptians. What did he do? Well, he delivered them from them twice, out of Egypt. And then when they were powerless to escape, locked in behind by the sea on one end and the Egyptian army on the other, God delivered them through the faith of Moses, who planted that rod, and then God acted because of the faithfulness or the faith shown by Moses and the people in God. God responded. And that's what God's pointing to. God is saying, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Where? Mount Sinai, where God came down in thunder, lightning, flashes, earthquakes. And the people are saying, no, we don't want it no more. Moses, you tell us what to do and we will do it. This is what God is referring to. Foreign to the Hebrew culture was the Western virtue of skepticism or doubt. Okay, so what we're looking at is the three methods that are promoted within Western thinking, Western philosophy: rationalism, empiricism, and skepticism. Rationalism is not a center point of Hebrew thought, because Hebrew thought did not generate reliable knowledge through their having a conference or sitting down or by consensus. It was not between them, it was between them, God and the Hebrew people. So how does skepticism fit into the Hebrew culture or doubt? Well, these are the dispositions modeled by following the Socratic method. Socrates, his method modeled the following dispositions. And look at these dispositions and compare them to the tribe of Israel, to the nation of Israel. Number one, rational thinking. Okay, is that the source of reliable knowledge? And it's kind of like, no. Open-mindedness. Open to what? No. The Hebrew culture was in covenant to their God, who promised to give them knowledge, to give them wisdom. 3, were they analytical? No, they were holistic. They took everything in a ball, everything complete together to see how everything functioned. And they believed in God because of this, and this in a holistic manner. It didn't separate their concept of God from the history of what they had with God in it. Self-confidence. No, they weren't called to be self-confident. They were called to be confident in God, and that is through the covenant. Inquisitiveness. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? You mean just by curious? I'm sure that drives a lot of people, but if you mean inquisitiveness by doubting or by saying, I wonder if that's true, I wonder if this is, I wonder if that, then no, that was not a part of the Hebrew culture. How about questioning the status quo? No, that was not highly looked upon either within the Hebrew culture, is that they respected leadership. They respected Moses. They respected God, who was under Moses, who was under God. So questioning the status quo, questioning of authority. No, that they were not encouraged to embrace these dispositions. Well, how about being suspicious of knowledge claims? Again, if God is their source of wisdom and knowledge, then how are they supposed to be suspicious of that? They're suspicious by implementing a human reasoning that is limited, that is damaged by sin nature. Are they to be suspicious then? And kind of like, no, I don't believe any of these are part of the Hebrew culture. So if we're looking at epistemological beliefs, okay, and there's some that say because of some epistemological beliefs, these people cannot think critically. Well, that could be true, but in the Hebrew case, it's that they are commanded not to seek wisdom from man or from below, but seek wisdom from God above. In the New American Standard Bible, the Old Testament, there is only one occurrence of the English term doubt. And it refers to being suspended, as in being hung with life in the balance. So it's doubt, is there still life? Because he's being suspended. In the New Testament, there are 10 occurrences of the English term doubt in its various forms. So we go from the Old Testament of one occurrence, that's translated doubt, and if you go into a lexicon and you look up doubt, Old Testament, New American Standard Bible, that's what I have been using, there's only one registry of the word doubt in the Old Testament. And its Hebrew word, it doesn't list one. Because there is no Hebrew word that corresponds to the meaning of doubt. Now, how about we're looking at then the New Testament? The New Testament has 10 occurrences, 10 times more occurrences. They have 10 of the English term doubt in its various forms. And it's kind of like, why the difference? I mean, even though there's only 10, that's not that many. That's 10 times the amount. Well, between the time that Old Testament was written and given, Israel had been deported, conquered. And so the Torah written, the first 5 books. So they're past a time when Israel was disobedient. Israel disobeyed the covenants that were before them, and therefore God allowed them to be conquered and deported. And the first one happened around 600 in the Babylonian conquest. But most of the people went to Babylon, and most of the people stayed together, and they maintained their Jewishness. They maintained, and actually that is the beginning of the concept of synagogues, so that they maintained their faith in purity, whereas at that same time there was a lot of Jews that instead of going to Babylon escaped to Egypt. And then about a couple hundred years later, there was Alexander the Great around 330 BC that came through conquering again. And he conquered again the whole territory. And he did not impose upon the Jewish nation that they had to forsake all their beliefs, that they had to just leave who they were, adopt a new language, custom, culture. But he was very smart, Alexander the Great, and they founded study centers. And Alexandria in Egypt was one of the cities that he founded, and it became one of the biggest scholastic study centers in the world, with one of the biggest libraries, and which also had the size of Alexandria at that time. I don't know how many there were, if there was several 100,000 people, but a third of them were Jews. And what happened is that Alexander the Great used his cities to Hellenize the conquered nations. So the Jews that went to Alexandria became Hellenistic Jews. They accepted the Western philosophy. They accepted the Western way of thinking. So that is why we have 10 times more occurrences of the word doubt in the New Testament, because of the Hellenization process that was influencing how the Jews thought. So you had Hellenized Jews, and you had the conservative Jews. And I believe that is why we have different levels or different amounts of the word translated doubt between the Old Testament and New Testament, but it still was not a common word. In the Greek New Testament, the Greek term translated doubt is diareno. Diareno is what has been translated doubt in the New Testament. But what does that term actually mean? That term actually means, the definition is to distinguish, to discern, to judge, to doubt. So in other words, in your process of discerning, in your process of distinguishing, in your process of judging, you doubt one is true. You doubt something. But usually the term diakrino has 2 things or more in mind, and it is distinguishing between them. The meaning is to separate, distinguish, discern one thing from another, to doubt, hesitate, and waver. So that is the term, diakrino. Usage. The Greek verb diakrino primarily means to separate or distinguish between different elements, often implying a process of careful judgment or discernment. The term suggests a thorough examination or evaluation, often requiring wisdom and insight. So what we're talking about here is a Greek word that seems to include then study, thinking, discerning, critical thinking. Which one is true? I doubt one. And so it's requiring wisdom and insight. Now we're going to have a little context here of putting that word, that Greek word, diakrino, or however it's said, into context. James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. So where do the Jews go, the Hebrews, for wisdom, for knowledge? If any of you lacks wisdom or knowledge, ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and without reproach. So who is their source? It's God. Is it a reliable source? If he's God, then yes, he is reliable. He's above reproach. He's above our critically examining him, because we are on a lower level. We are dealing with faulty equipment. We are dealing with a mind that is finite and does not know everything. We're dealing with a mind, biblically, that has been damaged by sin and sin nature. Or if we don't believe that, then we are dealing with a mind that is a product of explosions and just processes of evolution. And so either way, it's an apparatus that probably should not be trusted. It has not gained. And that is why, if we choose to believe in human reasoning, then there's good reason to doubt. But if we choose to believe in revelation, then doubt does not have a place. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, without any doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven by the wind and tossed. For let that man not think that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man and unstable in all his ways. Okay, so that's the context. James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8, where we have diakrino. Where is that? But let him ask in faith, without any doubting. That's the term right there, without any doubting. But then we have another term, faith. What does that mean? It's pistis, which means, definition, faith, belief, trust, confidence, fidelity. Its use in the New Testament, pistis primarily denotes a conviction or belief in the truth of something, often with the implication of trust and reliance. It is used to describe the faith that believers have in God and Jesus Christ, encompassing both intellectual assent and trustful commitment. Okay, so what we're talking about here is faith is not blind, and it is not just a leap. It is faith based in and on the God who they are in covenant with. And so it is in faith based on what he has done. And that's where we have a little different perspective on things, in that the Hebrew people and non-Western people back into the future. There's the future. And they back into the future with their eyes on the past and what God has done. And so with faith, trusting in what God has done, how much trust does it take to believe in what he has done? It's taking that same knowledge and applying it to, and he will take care of me in the future. Whereas in the Western mindset, we're facing this way. The future is in front of us and we're looking at it. And since things change so rapidly in the Western culture because of perishable knowledge, we think that history has nothing to teach us, that we look forward to what's ahead of us, and we really don't look back. But what gives us the confidence to go forward? And it's kind of like, well, that's kind of wavery on us. That's kind of doubting. And so what we do is there's a commodity here that is sold mostly in the Western world. It's called insurance. And insurance, they have insurance for everything. As we look to the future and it's unknown and it's unplotted, and we're not sure who's got us or if anybody's got us, so we buy into insurance to protect us against what might happen. Whereas in the non-Western culture, they don't see the future, they're backing into the future, and frankly, it's very hard to sell insurance in a culture like that. Because they're looking at the past and they are remembering what happened in the past and saying, yeah, he's never failed me, so I can take another step. He has never failed me. I can take another one. And so we keep going because based on the way that we are orientated. And so the faith is a commitment based on what God has already done, and that he has never, ever failed. Pistis is foundational to the Christian life, as it is through faith that believers are justified and live out their relationship with God. Pistis, faith, is foundational to the Christian life. Without faith, it is impossible. He who comes to God must believe that he is, that he exists. So in other words, we live by faith, but not a blind, nor a leap. It's a step, but it's a step focusing on what God has already done. And that's what gives us the faith, the conviction of things not seen to continue. That is the Hebrew way of looking at it. Cultural and historical background. In the Greco-Roman world, pistis was commonly associated with trustworthiness and reliability, both in personal relationships and in the context of civic duties. In the Jewish context, faith was deeply rooted in the covenant relationship with God, emphasizing trust in his promises and faithfulness. Back to the phrase of James chapter 1. But let him ask in faith, without any doubting. Okay, so we know that faith is pistis, and doubting is diakarino, or however it's said. So, let him ask in faith, without diakrino. Let him ask with the conviction of trust and confidence, without discerning, without judging, without doubting, without examining, without evaluation. Is that what that means? Is James then promoting the fact that, one, we ask for wisdom, but let me ask by faith? Where then do I analyze what is being given to me as wisdom? Well, if it's really from God, then James is saying, by faith you receive it. And it's not a blind, it's not a jump of faith, but it is not by diakrino. Diakrino is to distinguish, to discern, to judge, to doubt. The term suggests a thorough examination or evaluation, and James is saying no. Is he saying no? I mean, that's kind of what the construct seems to reflect, is that if you lack wisdom, ask of God, And he gives to all men, but let him ask in faith, without any doubting, without any diakrino. Okay. Is that just my construct? Is that just what I'm looking at? Well, we go to the expositor's Greek Testament, New Testament, and the author there makes a comment. He says, diakrino means to be in a critical state of mind, which is obviously the antithesis to that of him who has faith. It excludes faith. Wow. Okay, we're talking about critical thinking. We're talking about a critical mind. What does that have to do with wisdom and knowledge that the Hebrews have? Are we to apply critical thinking to it? And by this context, I would say that the authors are saying no. No, because if you really believe it's from God, then how can your human capacities evaluate that and critically think about it when we are working with lesser capacities? So again, diakrino means to be in a critical mind, be in a critical state of mind, which is obviously the antithesis to that of him who has faith. It excludes faith. Wow. So what do we do with that? I believe it's true. I believe that one, faith is not blind. Faith is not a leap. Faith is based upon what God has already done throughout history. And so if he gives us knowledge, he gives us wisdom, which it says, he is the source of all wisdom. He is the source of all knowledge. Do we believe that? Or will we still submit it to our critical thinking to see if, don't know if I want to do that, because he's requiring obedience, and I'm not sure if I want to be obedient to that one. The source of reliable knowledge is God. And the method of getting to reliable knowledge is by submitting to the current covenant of that time, being obedient. God was and is the source of all wisdom and knowledge. Now again, as we reviewed in other chapters, there are two sources of wisdom and knowledge. There is a worldly knowledge and wisdom, and there is a godly wisdom and knowledge. So obviously, the wisdom and knowledge that James is talking about is divine, is from God. It may not line up with the wisdom and knowledge that one gets from the world, and they're not supposed to, because they're two different sources, and they take us in two different directions. One takes us to God, and the other one takes us to a critical thinking that leaves all knowledge deconstructed, that leaves everything in doubt, that leaves everything in suspended, that there is no knowledge. Knowledge is perishable. Knowledge is subject to new knowledge, and then this knowledge is no longer true, or even knowledge. It's not knowledge. So there are different sources of knowledge. There's different kinds of knowledge. And the Hebrews were called to seek the knowledge from above, not the knowledge produced through Western philosophy. This is session number 7, wrapping up. Chapter 11, non-Western critical thinking. How are we doing? This is something that I was not expecting, really. And I've been working on it for several weeks, and actually I'm developing this on the run. as we go, and it's been very difficult. This is the first semester I think I've struggled with so many different sicknesses. But anyway, I'm beginning to see that the difference between the Chinese seeking critical thinking is because they do not have a source, divine source. They don't have a covenant. The Japanese, neither one of those cultures are really committed to a spiritual integration or worship. Their gods or their temples, they visit on occasion, special occasions during the year, but otherwise they really don't have a spiritual relationship as non-Western cultures. So critical thinking, I guess, can be applied to those cultures, but they'll change the culture if it's a Socratic method critical thinking engaging. But if it's a seeker type, then maybe it will preserve those two cultures. But in the Hebrew context, they have a source of reliable knowledge, and it is a source that man should not analyze. Man should not gauge and say, well, what do you think of this? Are you in the covenant or not? If you're in the covenant, then you need to receive and be obedient to what you receive from God through that covenant. What we have to discern, though, we are called to discern, is that from God? Or is it from the world? Because there's different spirits. There's worldly and there's godly. And so there's good, there's bad, there's evil, and there's divine. So anyway, wrapping up session number 7, chapter 11, non-Western critical thinking. We're Tim and Holly. And if you'd like to communicate with us, you can through the addresses here on the board. Thank you again.